Hello, my name is SherriAnneDuffy-King, and I'm going to be reading you a book that I wrote 15 years ago. The book is called The Title of a Crucified Innocence. Chapter 1, Hidden Secrets. All alone, Ashton and Evie sat in the study as rain poured heavily on the manor, drenching it. Ashton tried to peek out through the nearly impossible window above the armoire that lit the tiny one-window room. Climbing up on stacked boxes leading up to the ceiling in the shape of cardboard stairs, papers flew everywhere when he slipped on an old rotted cookbook, tumbling to the floor with a loud and obnoxious thud. Evie frantically freaked out and rushed to Ashton's side to make sure that he was okay. With a croak of laughter that echoed through the stone walls, he sat up, rubbed his head and butt with a bit of a funny bone pain. Evie helped him up and walked him to the aging dirt-brown sofa. Evie looked back to where Ashton landed. She heard a crack as the carpet sank into the floor, leaving immense crevices under its material. Evie began to cross the little room to investigate. Ashton grabbed her by her arm and pulled her back to where he was sitting. He suggested they get some flashlights. Evie skipped over to the small oak desk next to the sofa, sliding the drawers open. She reached farther into the dark hollow space before she couldn't move her hand fast enough. All right, so something started to crawl up it. She jerked her hand back in a yelp of a scream and noticed that it wouldn't let go. She struggled to get it off. Ashton wobbled over to her, still a little sore from the fall, grabbing it, only to find out it was a skeleton key with a lavender ribbon entwined in a bow at the bottom. At the edge of the ribbon, a white little mouse was caught in its clutches. It was Alfie, their pet mouse. Struggling to breathe and get its freedom back, Ashton unraveled the ribbon around Alfie's neck, placing the small creature in his pocket. As Ashton and Evie marveled at the key, they heard a scream of anger coming toward the study, toward them. In a fright, they grabbed the flashlights and removed the carpet. Ashton and Evie gawked at the crevice-trapped door at the edge of their feet. It was now or never. They grabbed the rusty old door-knocker ring and pulled as if their life depended on it. Chapter 2, Pain with No Pleasure. About to descend, Evie drenched the maroon carpet over the back of the secret door, closing it behind them as they descended the steep stairs. Now Ashton went first, being the braver one in case his sister lost her balance and tumbled down to the bottom, with a bruise cut on top of her red-headed scalp. Quite tragic. But despite their differences, they were all they had in these times. She had always been there for him, even when he was younger. He was filled with love for her. She was his best friend since their shared birth. He scratched his head with the tip of the flashlight, deep in thought. He barely noticed how dark the walls were. Evie closed the hatch behind them, and as she grasped the stone walls for balance, slicing her middle fingertip on something sharp, her blood poured endlessly, lighting up and changing the dark dreariness of the place into an ebony-lit, thriving area. The walls seemed to move in and out as if they contained active lungs. Frightened, Evie grabbed Ashton by the shoulder to stop his next step, not knowing that one more step he would have fallen down the swift vertical hole, embarking deep into the shallow abyss. He turned toward her with shock written about his face that soon changed to a thankful smile. He then noticed the color coming from her fingers that bounced off of the walls, making everything light up. Evie sat her left hand on the wall beside her, relaxing her weight. Unfortunately, it was so old that it was unable to hold her up for very long. Inches before she made a nosedive into the dirt floor, Ashton grabbed her and hauled her back to her feet. Evie squeezed tightly, overcome by thanks and almost strangling him, unaware that she was hugging too tight, until he tapped her on the arm, saying, "Air, Evie, I need air!" With a step back and a large sigh, "Oh, sorry, Ashton, are you okay?" Sucking in oxygen as if his life depended on it, because it did. "Yeah, I'm fine." Then they proceeded through the ragged archway into the misty old cavern. The cavern was 20 feet high and around in the shape of a dome. At the other end there was a door cracked open. Light was illuminating the dome cavern. They were halfway across when they heard a loud cracking sound echoing through the cavern to their ringing ears. Down they descended into the underground rushing river, marshes, over a raging waterfall into the black hole, falling into the shallow abyss. Chapter 3: New Wonders. Alone in the dark, Evie awoke with her head throbbing and a sense of dizziness that made her eyes feel as though they were going to swell and burst. But instead of worrying about herself, Evie was being overwhelmed with a feeling of dread for her brother. Where was he? Sitting up, with a pain in her side, Evie managed to pull her auburn, curly locks back in a ponytail. Evie managed to stand tall and straighten the bottom of her skirt to where it sat comfortably above her knees. Taking a deep breath, Evie's eyes wandered around. Evie realized she was on an enchanted island. Green leaves hung everywhere. Beneath her, pure white sand and the crystal blue water at the edge of her feet took in sparkles from the sky. On her right was an enormous waterfall embedded in jungle plants. It almost took her breath away as Evie exhaled and inhaled a couple of times before spotting the sky. Deep royal blue cascading the black space. Stars scattered in their own little spaces high above Evie's wandering eyes. Evie looked down at her shoes, making sure her legs were unharmed and ready for the long trek, before Evie would embark on her own little journey to her twin brother. Evie reached into her sky blue sweater and found the flashlight hanging in her pocket. Shaking the water from the flashlight and pressing the button. Click. At first it didn't work. Then Evie shook it again, pressing the button in hopes that it would work to light her way. Click. Not realizing where it was pointed, Evie's eyes were blindsided by the light. Evie quickly rubbed her eyes with her cotton white shirt. After waiting for the blur to depart, which came quickly, Evie was now ready for the journey. The jungle was very thick with brush and silent, too silent for her comfort level. Somehow Evie was managing at her own pace. Evie glanced up at the stars, knowing that they would light her way and give her some hope for the future. Up ahead, Evie saw a clearing and noticed a camp with fire and decided to go and investigate. Reaching the camp, Evie noticed a sign stating where she was. The camp was empty with not a soul around. Food still sizzled on the fires. Everything else was abandoned. Reaching the sign, reading out. She was reaching a sign and reading it out loud. Eldor. Assuming that this world was called Eldor, a draft of wind spilled past Evie and gave chills up her spine, leaving hairs trickling up and down her arms, flooded by unforgiving emotion. At that point, the world called Eldor felt cold and lonesome. It seemed as though there was not a creature of existence there. Evie knew that she could not be alone in this godforsaken place that shouldn't exist. It appeared to be dark and misty, with a creepy, mystical breeze that soon fell into fog that was absolutely seemingly to become so thick you could cut into it with the blade of an umbala. That was an odd thought. What the heck is the blade of umbala? Where did that word come from? The fog reminded Evie of how wonderfully thick and yummy Mother's special recipe of butterscotch cake tasted. Boy, Evie missed her so much that she felt a breakdown on the verge of releasing salty, warm tears from her eye crevices. So as hard as Evie might try, she kept herself from crying. Plus the fog was almost as thick as barbed wire, which made no difference where she was about to go. Evie looked at both sides of her and realized that she was filled full of wretched thoughts that mortified her. How can she be absolutely alone? Evie knew she had to stop breathing so rough. Evie could easily throw herself into a panic attack. Evie could hear the faint, overcrowded voices that filled her mind with what should it have been if there were people there. Evie decided to scowl around a bit for some unmistakable clues, but found none that caught her interest until Evie saw something in the far distance that seemed to be blowing in the wind, fighting for its freedom to be united to itself by begging for the hard, cold, wet mosh pit of the gravel to let it go. Evie hurried to it as to make sure it wouldn't leave without her first getting a good glimpse of it for some sort of answers. Evie bent down to reach her hands toward the folded-up object, to be surprised when it started to glow and shake, then transform itself into different shades of the rainbow's anatomical amazing colors. It turned bright red, then a strange sound fell upon it that threw a shudder of fright through Evie's body and led shivers up her spine. How was Evie to know that what she had touched would come at her like nothing she'd seen before? The wind started to shift, and to Evie's dismay, a growling sound began to get louder, as if she knew there was something there, waiting for something to happen. Evie dropped the paper, and when she reached down to retrieve it, something leapt onto her. When Evie hit the ground and rolled a couple of steps away from where she stood, Evie laid there for a moment to catch her breath. As Evie lay there for a moment longer, Evie could not help but stare up into her peach-colored eyelids until she could conjure up enough courage to peek out and see what was afoot. One eyelid slid open with no problem, but the other one seemed to take an eternity to wedge open. Chapter 4. Shocking Revelations. When Evie finally opened them, she realized something was wrong. She wasn't where she was supposed to be. She was in a bed, with the smell of brewed-up stew hovering over her head. Just then someone rushed in, skirt flaunting about the room as if it was the only thing that mattered. When Evie saw them, her vision began to blur. All Evie could see was that the person was a gray, blurry shadow wandering around the room with their back towards Evie. Evie gathered up her energy, sat up, and asked where she was. The person must have heard her, because they froze in a still shocked position, then turned and looked at Evie directly in the eyes and vanished into thin air. Evie, taken back by what she had seen, screamed. Evie couldn't believe what she had just seen. Then a bunch of rogue-looking guys wandered in. Their concerned eyes let her know that they were worried about her. Evie blew off the earlier scene, thinking that they might ponder the idea that she was nuttier than a fruitcake, and Evie wouldn't have blamed them. She was starting to think one too many screws were loose in her noggin. Evie shrugged to let them know that she was okay, which let them know Evie was just startled by her surroundings. 5 men stood in front of Evie in the arched frame of the door, one in the center and 2 guards on each side of him in matching uniforms, red balloon-shaped drawers, and a black sash wrapped around their waist with daggers in between the skins of their sash and their bare sides. The man in the middle was dressed in silks as bright as the sunset in the brisk of fall. He had golden bracelets covering both semi-muscular arms. His hair was as dark and silky as the English Channel, shimmering in the stars on the sweet summer night. His eyes were magnanimous as they glimmered with disposition under the dim candlelight. His face was chiseled in a soft but charming way. He paced back and forth as if he had ants in his pants, and his eyes creased, his worry drenched his very eye sockets. He started giving orders to his guards. They gave him an acknowledging nod and left in a light and quick pace. After they left, he turned toward Evie and started talking in some rubbish language she couldn't quite calculate quick enough for his patience. He stopped, pointed at Evie, and said something that sounded like Frudenovkli e Brucheska Flangricha, then glided smoothly toward Evie and touched her forehead with the palm of his right hand, and his left hand he placed under Evie's breastbone while closing his eyes. The places he touched started to glow and tingle with a warm, feathery feeling. After what seemed like a long 5 seconds, he removed his hands and slid onto the edge of the bed and said once more, "Hello, Princess. We have waited an eternity for you to show up here." Evie covered her eyes with her hands, but she couldn't relinquish the fact that her mouth lay gaped open like a nutcracker's wooden mouth. "We almost gave up on the foretold prophecy that you would come and save our prospering little tribe. After hearing that, Evie removed her hands and slid them down her face to rest upon her blanketed lap. "What are you talking about?" Evie asked in horror. "Where am I, and when am I, and who are you?" Losing her cool, Evie began to panic. Not only was she lost, but these nut jobs put a weight on her shoulders Evie didn't think that she would be able to bear. This time the man on the end of the bed sat straight up and softened his expression to understand how Evie was feeling, and placed his hand on her knee and repeated slowly so that she not miss a word. My name is Sire Akmulutra, heir of Mbala. Then he pulled an ancient dust-packed book from behind him and cracked it open to read to Evie. Times are dark and lonely, when in the year of Nude a strong and powerful woman will immaculate with the sense to stay and combine the world of Mbala into one sacred place. She will be beautiful and intelligent, and every creature will want to follow her. She will choose between two men, which she will marry one and decide the fate of all. One who competes for her love and affection will be the sire of Mbala, and the other shall be sire of Shonizar. With that information, Evie lay back against the silky lavender goose feather pillow and sighed out of anguish. So you somehow think that I am the one in that prophecy? Evie said in a soft but hasty tone. Yes, I believe you are. We found you lying in the field by a dead tree as old as time itself, lying half in the river and half embanked on the gravel. Since we brought you to my palace, I have grown quite fond of you while you sleep, he said as his eyes lit up. Ha! I see you have been mistaken. I am lost and need to get home, and quick. My mother is probably sick with worry and crying her eyes out as we speak. Although what Evie said was probably true, Evie knew that even if she went back, Evie was to be wed to Sir Henry Lockhart. Although charming he might have been, she certainly was not just ready to settle down with anybody. Her wishes were to seek adventure and settle in the States. Evie certainly had no clue how to get out of this tangling web. Princess, may I inquire about your name? He asked so politely that Evie couldn't refuse a man of his stature. My name is Lady Evie Trinity Bridgewater. As Evie said that, she heard the room echo in delight at it. He slid closer to Evie and asked her to marry him. Out of panic, Evie rushed to answer. Sire Akmulutra, I would be honored and delighted to accept your grand invitation, but I would like some time to register all that has happened to me today. With that answer, he shook his head in response, and as kind as he could, without cracking his face. I understand your disposition and would grant you 1 month, no less and no more, and when you are done taking in your surroundings, I will marry you with or without your consent. You will be mine to win this awful, heartbreaking war, and to do with as I please. With that, he slid off the bed, bowed at Evie, and vanished out the arched doorway. Evie paused and rewound the strange encounter and replayed it through her mind over and over until she crashed down on her pillows and slept for what felt like an awful eternity.